So I think they took advantage of Dawn's, she had just started and she had this office manager job, ambitious. And I think they just took advantage of her kindness. Dawn was a very kind person. She was very empathetic towards others. She always had her antenna up. When we were out, if one of my friends was like by themselves, God forbid, for 30 seconds, she would walk over and pull them into the discussion. Oh, come talk to us over here. She was a very nice person. And I think this really just crushed her spirits. I just think she just never could process, that the idealistic person who studied criminal justice and wants to make a difference and bring the bad guys to justice finds out that this real estate guy really isn't in the mortgage business. There is evidence that should be turned over. I mean, she did tell me once, look, I don't hate the police. I just think court should be fair. She just like, I just think that if a defendant is entitled to evidence, that should be turned over. And she said these prosecutors were just dirtballs. They were just extremely arrogant. They never would turn over the evidence that they were supposed to turn over. They loved to go on TV and they just didn't play by the rules.
That's Tony Viola, who was convicted of mortgage fraud. I'm Jason Blair, and this is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. The first paragraph of the January 5th, 2012 article in the Cleveland Plain Dealer described Tony Viola as one of the two leading players in one of the country's largest mortgage fraud schemes. It was 4 years after the beginning of what is now called the 2017-2018 financial crisis, the most severe worldwide economic crisis since the Great Depression, which economists now say was caused by predatory lending in the form of making loans to people who authorities later said lenders knew would never be able to pay the cost of the mortgages. These loans were characterized by higher interest rates, which increased the likelihood of foreclosure. The motives of the lenders were to obtain commissions and interest on loans that would make their financial statements look good. Before, and certainly as the loans began to fail, banks came up with creative ways to hide their losses from the books by packaging the failing mortgages and selling them to others like a high-priced hot potato that institutions would pay big dollars to keep off their books. In the wake of the financial crisis, one of the great criticisms of the administration of President Barack Obama and his Attorney General Eric Holder was that they had not done enough to criminally prosecute individuals and lenders who were responsible for the crisis and had bailed out and negotiated deals to rescue companies like Countrywide Financial, Bear Stearns, and IndyMac. In 2007, Tony was the chief executive of the Cleveland Heights, Ohio-based Realty Company of America, which had offices in Florida and Ohio and more than 150 employees. Tony, a graduate of Georgetown University and Case Western University, says he felt honored to run Realty Corporation of America and its affiliated businesses. And Tony said he prided himself in his innovation and the positive impact he believes their work had on communities and the employees. He was driven, he said, by the people who worked with him. In January 2012, Tony had been convicted in a federal case investigated by a multi-jurisdictional task force looking into mortgage fraud. He received a 12-and-a-half-year sentence in one of the few cases that the Obama administration prosecuted in the wake of public criticism for not holding mortgage companies and their leaders accountable. But in April 2012, Tony was acquitted of state charges brought by the same task force. He lives in a limbo where he has both been convicted and acquitted of the same crimes. After 9 years of fighting for his release, Tony has put his heart into an investigation into the mysterious death of 26-year-old Dawn Pasela, a whistleblower in this case who died of what authorities say was an alcohol overdose on the eve of her scheduled testimony about prosecutorial misconduct in Tony's case. Dawn was an employee of the multi-jurisdictional task force, and she reported to Tony's defense team that her bosses had asked her to infiltrate his team, illegally wiretap their conversations, and that evidence in his case had been destroyed or hidden. Since the conviction, one federal prosecutor was disciplined for sexual harassment that included touching an intern's breasts and requesting nude photos. More seriously, a state prosecutor, Dan Caceres, was accused publicly by his wife and her family of having a sexual relationship with an informant and government witness in Tony's case. What's remarkably suspicious about Dawn's death is that she had a blood alcohol level of 5.9, which is virtually unheard of, and a much lower number often results in death. That Dawn had recently stopped drinking, and that her parents had been in her house just before, where there were no signs of alcohol. That there was alcohol that she had not been known by her family or friends to drink, and that there were cell phones that were unaccounted for in her house. The suspicious behavior of a man who others believed she had been dating and who also had ties to the prosecutors also raised alarms. Tony believes their documented misconduct was just the tip of the iceberg, but less than overturning his own conviction, Tony is focused on prompting a reinvestigation of Dawn's case. He believes that exploring his conviction and those of others is merely the best way to honor her life and her pursuit of justice in those cases. Tony worked as his own jailhouse lawyer and also investigated Dawn's case, making public record requests from jail, analyzing information, reaching out to experts, and later creating a Justice for Dawn Pasela Facebook group and the justicefordawn.com website. Today, we're going to discuss the lives of Dawn and Tony, Dawn's death, and what Tony hopes for in her case, and what we can all learn from the events that led up to and came after her death. So, Tony, I just wanted to thank you for joining me. I'm grateful for you for coming on to have this conversation. You know, we met through our friends at Seeking Justice who have been investigating Dawn's death and exploring things. And, I watched their first YouTube episode, not knowing that you were going to actually be on there, thinking, we'd be talking about the case. And I was just really impressed by your compassion, your intelligence, and just your overall dedication to the case.
Well, thank you. Thanks. It's great to be on your show. It's a great honor. And thank you for your interest. And yeah, those ladies at Seeking Justice, aren't they amazing? I mean, they are truly doing the work of angels. I mean, they're brilliant ladies, and they have chosen a path that is, it's not the path where they could make the most money, but it's the path of helping people and helping families and putting a spotlight on grave injustices, which is really what happened to Dawn is outrageous. But so kudos to them, and thanks so much for the opportunity to be on the show and for that fancy introduction. Very well done. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and you just said that, and I was thinking to myself, you don't see, I think, a lot of that kind of in the same way that your dedication to the case is impressive. You don't see, I think, in journalism or podcasting or a lot of fields right now that dedication to really digging in and I've just been impressed by it's in the same way I've been impressed by your efforts. I've been really impressed by their efforts. So it's nice that you guys found each other, I suppose.
Yeah, for sure. And we did a lot of grunt work. I mean, people always say, gee, Tony, you were so dedicated. I was in prison for 10 years. And in case anybody wondered, there's really not a lot going on there. So, I mean, I appreciate the kudos, but I was happy to work on the case when I was in there, and I did something. I decided I was going to do something every day. And as crazy as this might sound, you actually can waste a lot of time in prison, or you can try to do the right thing. And we used to just, camp out in the law library, help other guys with their cases, and then we'd learn. And so anyway, it was a an awful experience. I wouldn't wish it on anybody, but from dedication and hard work, we really put a lot of parts together. And so the Seeking Justice ladies are trying to tell the story in a more coherent way. And of course, I'm not the only person who put this information together. I'm very fortunate with a great private investigator and a lot of my friends that did what they could do, making records requests and following up and picking up stuff, and basically even keeping online the case alive and saying, look, you can't believe what the government said in this case. This is outrageous. And so that was good too, to keep that flame going for as long as we did. So it was definitely a group effort.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's neat to see people come together like that, and it's neat to see the community that you guys have built. I know we've talked a lot about the case, and I know you and I have talked about it. But one of the things that I think, maybe missing from the narrative for me is a little bit about you and, what it was like for you. I imagine none of us can ever imagine ourselves in the shoes that you ultimately found yourself in. But I'm just wondering about what it was like for you as a kid, sort of what some of your hopes and dreams were as a young man, a teen. What did you think your life was going to be like?
Well, I was heavily influenced by my huge Italian Catholic family. I come from a really loving and warm family. Everybody was always welcome to come for dinner. Come on in, Jason, bring a friend. If an army battalion needed to eat, we had plenty of food. So I came from a very loving, very warm family. And my family, everyone was a hard worker. I mean, hard work was a given. They used to say you may or may not be successful, but if you don't work hard, you have no chance. And so I had family members that owned little grocery stores and worked all hours of the day and night. My dad was a business attorney. He worked incredibly hard. Very rare as a young man did my dad come home from work before 7 or 7:30 at night. So we just worked very hard in our family. And so the other thing too is in Cleveland. So when I grew up, this was the Rust Belt, and all the steel mills were closing, and the car factories were closing, and this was the deindustrialization of our community, and it was heartbreaking because Cleveland, and that's how our family came here, and many other families came. Cleveland was the Silicon Valley of the early 20th century. Okay? The machine tool industry and Standard Oil. John Rockefeller started in Cleveland. So from a boom town where you literally could stand outside the gate of a factory and just, they would just pick people. You
find a job, you.
And immigrants or folks from the South, we have a lot of people from color from the South came to, because there's opportunities and you just needed people. And guess what? 6 weeks later, you had enough money to buy a refrigerator. And 6 months later, you had enough money to rent a house. Or a year later, you had enough money to buy a car. So the American dream and the upward mobility and folks that could, pay for their livelihood and for their kids to go to school. That's the other thing in my family. Education was always the most important thing. You got to study, you got to go to school, you got to take advantage of the opportunities that you have. So when you combine all that, to me, my dream was to come back to Cleveland. I was extremely fortunate to go to Georgetown University. I mean, what an amazing privilege and a greatest experience of all time. And most of the guys from there, a lot went to Wall Street, a lot went into the diplomatic corps, went all over the world. But I wanted to come back to Cleveland. And my first job was actually working at an old steel company that was here. Yeah. And then we just started buying houses and the real estate business sort of took off. But literally the idea of contributing to your hometown, creating opportunities, and being a part of something bigger than yourself. That's the other thing too,
That's what kind of pulled you to come back to Cleveland? That was a part of it? Or what? Because, you go up to Georgetown, one of the best schools in the country, right? You
very fortunate.
Go lots of different directions, right? But you decided to go back home.
I went back home because it was exciting to be a part of something bigger than myself. So, like, if we started a business and got a business going, you're a part of something bigger than yourself. So, in other words, Jason, if I sit around and say, "Gee, I want to get rich, I want to make a lot of money," you're not going to make any money. you make money by doing great things for people, delivering value, providing exceptional service. The old American better mousetrap, faster, better, cheaper, different. We're going to be better than the old stodgy companies. We're going to give customers a choice. We're going to do things differently. So all of that, of course, I didn't realize how challenging business actually was. So it's great to be 20 or 18 or 22 and thinking about business. But the idea of trying something, daring, I guess, even if you fall on your face, dare greatly or try, rather than never trying at all, is the old Teddy Roosevelt quote, better to, fail while try, than be on the sidelines, lobbing hand grenades about saying, well, you could have done this, or you shouldn't do that, or this was wrong, or that was wrong, or I would do this differently. So instead of being a naysayer, the old joke as the company was underway was it was ready, fire, aim. I mean, let's just do something. And it's something in business.
It's the old school version of, what is that saying now? It's like, move fast and break things.
Yeah, move fast and break things. That's the Zuckerberg stuff from Facebook.
Version of that.
Or
something
Uber.
That's been around for a while, right?
Right. Uber is the best example where it really was illegal to have Ubers because there was taxi cab monopolies, and they just said, the heck with that. It's an app and just sue us. And so that style, I don't think we were quite that daring. But the idea of trying something was very alluring. And so that's essentially the idea of what we did. And then when we surveyed the market, we did see some opportunities. There was underserved communities. There was folks that are paying an awful lot in rent, where their house payment would be substantially less. Mm-hmm. So I mean, if you're renting a 2-bedroom apartment and I can sell you a 3-bedroom house and the payment's less than your rent, you don't have to be the greatest salesman, right? Exactly, to do that. And so at the time, it just seemed like an opportunity to dive in and try. And the other thing too is my college sweetheart, Katrina Rose. She was a photographer, and she was a very creative person, and she loved the artwork and the old houses, and would walk into some houses. There was neighborhoods where there was empty houses. You could just walk in. Some were for sale for $1,000, $5,000. I mean, $10,000. So at the time, it just seemed like it didn't take a lot of capital to start either, because we weren't exactly, swimming in money at the time. But it was a business that you could start without a lot of upfront capital and just sort of make it go.
And so you guys really worked on it together. You mentioned her and the artwork and wanting to see things. It was a family affair.
It was a small core group. And, remember we hired our first salesperson that helped us was a gentleman named Leo Dombrowski. And Leo was about 5 or 6 years older than us. And we were just in awe.
We're like, wow.
How do you actually rent a house? Oh, a lease? Oh, a security deposit. Oh, that's a good idea. The Time Life book on how to do electrical work, what do you do when the fuse breaks? We really were novices. We had a lot more enthusiasm and excitement than we had actual knowledge. But people would just tell us, listen, you could always find people that are skilled. You can pay skilled craftsmen, but your drive, your energy, your idealism, that not everybody has. And then, of course, it's good to start when you're, we didn't have kids. We don't have, big bills or big overhead. So if we eat ramen noodles, who cares? It's a lot harder later in life if you have more financial obligations or family responsibilities. There may be folks that would love to do something entrepreneurial, but they say, gee, I got to pay the kids' tuition or the mortgage, and so that may discourage people. So it is a young person's game to an extent, not always, certainly. But if you don't have a lot of money, sometimes when you're youthful, you think, well, we'll figure it out later.
Yeah, right. Well, one of the things that I was wondering about too is, thinking of. A lot of people start businesses. What is it? The old saying is 1 in 5 fail within, 2 or 3 years. But a lot of people start businesses and just, getting to the point where you have one employee is like a big deal. But to get to 150, what was that journey from being a small sort of like tight group of people working together to becoming a large company? It must have felt surreal in itself.
It absolutely was. It was not a straight line to success. We made a lot of mistakes. We had reversals.
Peaks and valleys.
A lot. Yeah. I mean, I people ask me, what's it like to be a business owner? And I always say, if you have a job, think of your best day. When you own the company, it's 20 times better. But think of a bad day at work, at your W-2 job, and owning a
Yeah.
company 20 times worse.
Yeah.
So it is a roller coaster to an extent. I mean, the best advice is to hire people smarter than you. I mean, I would be in awe of some of the talent that we had in the company, and also having a very cohesive but diverse crew. When I say diversity, I mean not just racially and all, but I'm talking about experience diversity is also really important. So if you have 30 people that all have had a very similar background and similar experiences, that's not going to be as provocative and creative as you get. And we had all kinds of people at our company. We had a lady that graduated with a degree in, are you ready, medieval Spanish literature.
Nice.
Um,
Nice.
right.
Tony, I once had a boss when I was at the Boston Globe at the time, and I was working as a reporter. And we were having this conversation in the Washington bureau about journalism degrees or not journalism degrees, get a journalism degree or not. And people, often would say, go get a government politics or learn the craft of journalism. He said, I don't care if you major in dance. And he's like, and I would really actually like to have somebody around here who
Right.
was a dance major, because they would bring a different lens, they would bring a different perspective. And I thought it was just a very telling thing for me about diversity, that the lens that people look through
Right. So imagine a newsroom with 30 folks that have journalistic degrees. Well, that would be good because they would be rigorous. They would know how to check the sources and how do you confirm stuff and what's on background and what's off the record. All that's good, right? But what if you had, because you need some people with journalistic degrees and experience,
obviously,
right?
right?
But what if you had one person who was a political science major and one person who was a history major and a couple people who were really good at business and other people who were good at data analytics or other people who had criminal justice experience? I mean, you think of what a newsroom covers, right?
Right.
And you pick up any newspaper or any publication and you see the myriad of articles touch on a variety of things. So if you had someone who's really good at business or someone who's really good at the stock market or someone who's really good at criminal justice stuff, in those stories you would be able to compare the journalistic skills with the experience, and then I think you get a better result. So it's like my Italian family would say, you want to make a good meal, let's use more than 3 ingredients. Oh, yeah. Right. So, I mean, that's kind of what happened in our company because we had a variety of folks. And incidentally, different skill sets are actually quite good. Not only are the customers different, right? So people relate to customers differently, but I mean, some people had really good writing skills, and that's important when you're making proposals to businesses, but also having good verbal skills and we had artistic skills. And I mean, so anyway, a variety of skills were great. But you asked, what was it like? It was incredibly humbling to have so many folks working for us, and we recognized that every day they could go somewhere else. I mean, in the real estate business, we had contractors who did property management and construction, and we had sales team members that were real estate agents. But every single person, and then the administrative staff, I mean, they were incredibly talented, and they could walk across the street and go and get hired somewhere else. And our folks were constantly being recruited. So it was humbling. And then we also recognized that, the customers are our customers of the company, but so are the people that work there. So we tried our best to allow everyone to excel. People excel at different paces. They're good at different things. The most important thing also in a business is make sure that you let everyone rise to the level of their abilities. If you make the plumber be a salesman and the salesman be a plumber, it's probably not going to work. So one of the key things a manager or a boss can do is identify, what is Jason really good at? What is Jason good at that's really better than anyone else here? And then if you're focused on what you do best and what you like best, and then it's a virtuous circle, because you're going to enjoy success, and then you're going to be more successful in your career. You're going to have more confidence. You're going to study up on it, read up. And so you want that. And the converse is also true. If you put somebody in a position where it's not really suited to their skill set, over time, they'll get frustrated and it won't be a good situation. So trying to take all these disparate folks that we had and managing them and making sure that we are providing the right infrastructure and marketing and talent, expertise, and administrative support, it was a challenge. I mean, it was the ultimate challenge in life, to start with 2 credit cards in the basement of my house and build this business up. And it certainly would have never happened without my fantastic colleagues that really helped make it happen.
Did you ever, I'm so curious about this. Did you ever have moments where, like, I don't know, let's say a Christmas party or some other event where, like, the relatives of the people who work for you are there, and you look out and, like, you see the kids, or you see the spouse is at home or whatever it is, and think, wow, like, my success, like, I'm responsible for these people. Like, if all of a sudden I decide I make a big mistake, or if something goes wrong, like, or the other way around, some sense of pride in it. Did you ever have moments where you just thought, like, wow, this is a heavy weight to carry?
I did feel the responsibility. I never really felt that it was, wow, look at what a great job Tony did, because there wouldn't have been a company without all my colleagues. So it was really their company in a sense. But yes, there was, when we had a new hire and their folks would come downtown to the office and take their daughter to lunch, or we would have family days and we take, 200 people to the baseball game. I mean, yes, I recognize that it was an awesome responsibility. Really, I just looked at myself as sort of a trustee in a way. Like, in other words, I didn't really think the company's money was my money. So I drove an old Mercury. I never bought a Bentley or a Jaguar. I never care less. And so I never really looked at the company's money as my money. I actually paid myself the same way the sales team members got paid, which is a percent of transactions that I sold. So the my own, because I was always selling stuff.
So
And
even when you were managing the company, you were
I
selling yourself?
absolutely
Wow, interesting.
continued to be a quote realtor. And the reason is because it's a sales driven organization. And the minute I become a manager, walking around with a clipboard and a tie, then that takes away the magic of the company. We were not a corporate, bureaucratic Byzantine Empire style top down. That wasn't what we were doing. So because it was a sales driven organization, I felt like the best way I could manage the business was have my finger on the pulse and actually go out there and get my head bashed in with the rest of the salespeople, get yelled at when things didn't sell, or if we were supposed to lease office space for companies and they were disappointed. I mean, believe me, they didn't mince words. So I thought that was vital that I maintained
Kind
my
of like
sales.
department chairs in a hospital who still see patients because you see the
Right.
new things and the new challenges. So, what was it like for you? I think in that going through the housing crisis itself, even before you became a target for it, did it change your business or change the work? What did it feel like then? It must have
Well, when I started, it was extremely difficult to get a loan. 20% down, high credit. It was very difficult. I remember a loan officer calling me when the interest rates went below 10%. And he
this
said,
is like early 80s, late
no, early 90s.
early 90s, early 90s.
Okay.
Okay.
Early mid 90s.
Okay.
Oh, when these rates go below 10%, we're really going to mop up. So when I started, it was very difficult to finance property, and unless you had very good credit and a substantial down payment. So, and that was the era that we grew up in. And then after 9/11, you may remember George Bush told everybody to go shopping, and General Motors to keep America rolling, and 0%. This and Alan Greenspan lowered the interest rates, keep the economy going. And so what happened was interest rates essentially went on a 7-year squiggly
Sleep.
line down. I mean, it went on a squiggly line down. And so what was happening was that means when interest rates go down a half a point, a lot of people refinance. If it goes down a point, more people refinance, or a point and a half. And so what's happening is it became a boom time where people would literally, were selling cell phones at a mall or selling cars and literally jumped into the mortgage business because it was the hottest thing in town. Now, remember, I was accused of mortgage fraud, but I'm a realtor. I was a real estate broker. We're the people showing houses. We are not the people taking your loan application, asking for your W-2s and pay stubs. And I myself never borrowed money. So just to fast forward and just make one point is most of the people targeted in mortgage fraud prosecutions were either mortgage loan officers who were dummying up documents or committing fraud, or people who lied to buy, I want to buy an apartment building. I don't really have the money. I'm going to, create fake bank statements so I can borrow $2 million. I never borrowed money in our business ever. We were always conservatively financed and never borrowed a penny, keep our overhead low. And then I never borrowed money to buy real estate. I was in the
for yourself personally.
Correct.
Personally, yes.
Except for the house I lived in, I got a mortgage just like everybody else. But other than that, I was not acquiring real estate by using debts or anything else, and I certainly wasn't in the mortgage business at all. So the whole thing was a shock. But the answer to your question was initially, when those subprime lenders loosened up the market and lots of people could acquire rental properties, I thought it was fantastic because in America, the difference between wealthy people and working people is wealthy people own assets that make them money. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they own assets. They own stocks. They own bonds. They own apartment buildings. They own rental property. They own companies. They own things that generate money. They're sitting at the beach and they're making money.
Mm-hmm.
Working people,
passive income, right? No income that requires no work. It's the dream.
Correct. They own stock in, JP Morgan Chase and they get a dividend. Okay. Or they have a money market account and they get interest. So the difference between working people and wealthy people is the working people, a lot of us live paycheck to paycheck. It's hard to save money. It's hard to get ahead. And we literally punch a time clock. Now, look, you can be an employee and make a lot of money. LeBron James is an employee, okay, of the Lakers. I mean, so I'm not saying that it's bad to be an employee. What I'm saying is that wealth creation is the key different, that was what the opportunity initially in the market looked like. Wow. Finally, folks that are renting, that are paying all this rent can own a house and they can build equity over time and they can send their kids to school or pass the house on to their kids, or they can buy an apartment building or they could buy a rental house. So initially I was very excited that the market was opening up. We were gung ho about it. But quickly there became problems. So even in this blending boom, these lenders were doing all kinds of shady things. And if you want me to share with you, I'd be happy to do it. But they were doing all kinds of crazy things and people were complaining. And our business was built on happy customers, not unhappy customers. And
I was going to say something. You had mentioned in the beginning that part of what pulled you back to coming to Cleveland were those kinds of opportunities to kind of give back to the community, right? And it sounds like that period after 9/11 where interest rates came down gave you probably even a greater opportunity in your mind as a real estate agent to give, or real estate broker, to give back because other people now have the opportunity to create wealth and to acquire assets. Is that fair?
Right. So when interest rates are low, it makes the housing payments much more affordable and it makes it a lot easier for people to qualify. So somebody renting an apartment, pick your number, I don't know, $2,000 a rent a month or $1,500, whatever it is. It's a lot easier to say, hey, listen, you can own a house. Now, the reverse is true. When interest rates are high, it's a lot harder to become qualified because your income may not, there's these debt ratio issues. So your income may not support a higher mortgage payment. And so when the interest rates were at rock bottom, people renting who had wanted to figure out a way to buy and didn't have a giant down payment, now all of a sudden think, hey, I can, instead of throwing all my money away on rent, I can actually own a house. And real estate is get rich slow. Okay. So you're building a little equity over time. Hopefully every year the house is worth 1 or 2 or 3 or 4% more than it was before. But over time, that is going to add up. That equity and hopefully price appreciation is going to add up. And so now all of a sudden, somebody that really doesn't have any assets, maybe they own a car, which is a depreciating asset. Now all of a sudden they own a house that they live in and enjoy. And then people would buy a 2-family house and rent the half. And then now all of a sudden, instead of paying $1,500 in rent, now they're paying nothing and they're renting the other side out. So this is what was going on in the community. So initially I thought this was fantastic. And the other thing is people were acquiring rental properties. Now it was a boom. So when you got a boom, you got FOMO, fear of missing out. Okay. You're reading in the paper, someone else flipped houses and made all this money. You're at some cocktail party and some guy flipped the house and got rich. And so people are saying, well, why don't I do that? What am I doing? Sweeping the floors over here at this factory when everyone else is getting rich. So what happened was you have fear and greed in real estate, and it's a pendulum that goes too far one way and then too far the other way. And in history, the banks are either too quick to make money or it's impossible. And there's probably some happy medium that we should hit. But the reality is there's cycles in real estate. Well, people were starting to complain because they had adjustable rate mortgages or the rate that they were quoted.
Which are mortgages where you don't have a steady rate over the course of the whole mortgage, right? They balloon.
Correct. Right. The best situation is when rates are low, you want a 30-year fixed. You don't want it ever to go up. You could refinance if the rates fall further, but you don't have to.
I was saying, particularly when I'm 80, I want the 30-year fixed.
Yeah, well, you always want a 30-year fixed. Well, you live at least 110, but you always want a fixed rate only because there's certain exceptions. If you're going to only live in a house a couple of years or you're fixing it to sell it, there are some times when a shorter term adjustable rate may be reasonable if you're going to sell it well before the rate adjusts. But as a general proposition, you want to lock a rate in. And also for investors, the same thing, because the rent is so much, say the rent is $2,000 and your payment's, $1,200. You don't want to have a situation where your payment exceeds the rent, which actually happened in some cases, which is one of the causes of foreclosures. These companies were promoting these teaser rates and low interest rate loans. I had a customer call me and complain that the rate went up. And I called the loan officer and I said, look, this lady is saying that the rate, that now her payment is substantially more than the rent, and that she's deriving from this property. What's the story here? And he said, oh, she got a parking lot loan. And I said, well, what's a parking lot loan? And he said, well, after she signed the documents, by the time she went to the parking lot, the rate probably went up. And he thought it was amusing. So, what happened was we quickly were like, whoa, this is crazy. This is the Wild West with these lenders changing rates. And remember, the realtor doesn't go to the closing. We don't sit there and go through these documents. We're showing houses and writing contracts. So, but once customers started complaining about this, we were very concerned. And we ended up putting all these procedures in place. I had this real estate lawyer that was pretty darn good. And I said, look, we need to do something here. You can't build a business with unhappy clients.
Right. Right.
You can't do it. I don't care what
the business that requires return customers.
Right. And then one unhappy person is going to tell people, and they're going to go online and put a thing on Yelp or whatever, Google. You can't be successful. Remember, I'm from here. I live here. It's not like we're some, remotely operated business. I go to school here, I go to church here, I get friends here, whatever. So I don't want to be afraid to go to some restaurant or the coffee house because some lady's mad at me. So, but it's just bad business. It's not that we're angels and saints. It's just bad business. We built our company on repeat customers and doing a good job for people. You do a good job, people will recommend you. You get referrals. You do a bad job, people are going to tell 15, 20, 30 people. Their whole network will know. And so we were very concerned about some of the slimy things.
And it's especially true in real estate because the way that you guys make your money, it's your circle of influence.
Yes. The worst thing on earth you could do, even assuming you could make money by doing so, is to rip somebody off in real estate, because you would ruin your entire business, and our colleagues wouldn't have stayed. Like when we were being prosecuted, they would tell these crazy prosecutors, Mark Bennett and Dan Caceres, look, if this guy was anything like the guy you're describing on television, do you really think I would work there? Do you really think I have children? Do you really think that I wouldn't take my license and go across the street to Remax and go work there?
I was going to ask you actually about that. Like, what was it on the day? Because I imagine it was a surprise. Like for you and your employees, the day the investigators showed up at the door.
Well, they didn't really show up. They raided the company. They had a SWAT team and guns and helicopters and, paramilitary equipment. It's a joke. Here we are, realtors drinking coffee, wearing suits and ties.
Actual helicopters flying above.
They loved it. Are you kidding? Yeah, so the government created a media circus. There's a journalist here named Michelle Jarboe at now Crane's Cleveland Business. They tipped them off and they were, hey, what's up with the raid? I'm like, what? So that was but I actually wasn't at our office. I was at a meeting with a client, and then and they knew that I was at this meeting, and my phone was blowing up, and I'm like, something's wrong. And then I called and I said, what? I said, I stepped out for a second. I said, what's up? And they said, the police are here. Well, in Cleveland, there had been a lady, assaulted, and a different person was actually murdered in a parking garage downtown. So I first thought my heart dropped. I thought, oh my God, if one of the people that, works with us, one of our colleagues, that's what I first, my heart just totally dropped. And I said, what do you mean? What's happening? And she said, they're taking our computers. They're raiding our company. I said, what? I said, are you kidding me? So I actually raced down there, and the FBI agent, this guy named Jeff Kassouf, is they're looking for mortgage files. Where are the mortgage files? We're here for the mortgage files. We're not a mortgage company. I told him, we're not a mortgage company. Are you guys kidding me? And he said, you're going to be a smart ass. You're going to make this a lot harder on yourself. So, that was my first law. I never had any interaction with law enforcement. They take things very personally. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so I was asking, are you with the right company? Not being a wise guy, but it's unusual to look. It's like saying, the basketball team is bad. We're going to fire the coach of the football team. We're at the football team training camp looking for the basketball team's playbook. I'm like, we don't do mortgages. Are you guys serious? And so this was a disaster.
Or maybe more like the basketball team sucks here because the coach is doing X, Y, or Z. So we're going to, fire the people in concessions, right? It's connected, but it's not. Or the trainers or whoever. It's connected, but we don't give each other orders here. The physician tells the trainers what to do. The coach tells us to do, right? We have our own.
Yeah. Somehow real estate, mortgages, whatever, it's all
became the same thing. Yeah.
So, what happened? It's the most awful thing ever. I wouldn't wish it on anybody. I just remember putting my head in my hands thinking that my reputation has just in an instant been evaporated. No matter what happens from now, people will think I'm a criminal. They will think that I got off on some technicality, even if I win. It was just awful. I had the weight of, just as you mentioned before, Jason, which is a very good point, all those folks that, are my colleagues. They all have rent and car payments and house payments, and I'm worried about them, and I'm worried about it's really just like walking into freeway traffic and getting run over by a Mack truck, I guess is what I would say. And there's no need for the government to do these televised live breaking news raids because they locked themselves into a false narrative. They said I stole $46 million in the nation's largest mortgage fraud case. They would not let me call my lawyer. I had a real estate lawyer. I'm like, I got to call some kind of an attorney. Wouldn't let me do that. They ushered us all into a room at gunpoint. It was ridiculous. And they were looking at for mortgage files. And then when they finally left, I went down to address the reporters, and I said, this is absolutely unacceptable. We are a real estate company, and if the government was investigating or wanted information, we would have how about a subpoena? What do we have SWAT teams for? And so this thing got off on the wrong foot in their mind because the FBI guy thought I was being a wise guy because I said we're not a mortgage company, and then they didn't apparently the prosecutor's feelings were hurt because I sort of stepped on their narrative a little bit because I just was not going to say no comment. The one thing I knew was I don't like it when I'm watching TV and someone says no comment.
I was going to ask. No. Because if you had gotten to your lawyer probably would have said, please don't say.
Probably, but I said there's no way I'm saying no comment. And I went down and I started answering questions. And of course, the journalist said, these are very serious charges and this is very serious. And I said, yes, I agree. And I understand that. But FBI agents were asking me for mortgage files. We are not a mortgage company. So I just said at that point, I don't care. I'm not going to say no comment.
What was your thought there that like silence will be interpreted, even though we have all these rights to even in a courtroom, the right not to be silent, and certainly you don't have to answer questions, but that silence would be interpreted as some kind of guilt?
Yes, silence is an admission of guilt, in my opinion, and no comment is an admission that you have something to hide. And the other thing is we are in a sales and marketing business, so I was used to making presentations and going to businesses and, in a conference room and talking about why you should hire us. And so, the idea that all of a sudden, the guy that, isn't going to, that'll go to someone's house at 8:30 at night and tell them why you should list your property with our company, all of a sudden doesn't want to talk to journalists. I also had I always had a high opinion of journalists. I really have been told by multiple journalists since then that they won't burn the U.S. Attorney's office here. They won't burn the prosecutor's office because they're a source of leaks and information. And at the time, though, I had a more idealized view of journalists as someone who, collectively, that they would truly, if the government's having raids and press conferences, that they would give me a chance. They really never did. What the thing it's called the plain dealer. We used to call it the very plain dealer.
Yeah, the Cleveland Plain Dealer.
Yeah, the Cleveland very plain dealer. They would put a guy named Mark Gillespie. He would put at the end of the thing, Viola denies the charges, but the prosecutors got inked by the barrelful, and we would barely get anything. A guy named Pete Krause, who's still there, he came to my office, interviewed me for 2 hours, never published a thing. So it was very difficult to get in a word edgewise. And there was a lot of hysteria about people were furious with the
About
financial
mortgage fraud, right? Yeah.
and their houses had gone down in value, and there was anger. But the government should have just been honest and said, look, we're not going to prosecute banks. You mentioned in your intro, why didn't President Obama or Eric Holder, why didn't these? Well, they should have just been honest and said, look, if we prosecute banks, it'll crash the economy. Your ATM card won't work. Your retirement account's going to be vanished. Your credit card won't work. I mean, instead of just being honest, they blame realtors for stuff that banks were doing. We had nothing to do with these mortgage programs. And I've had people say, oh, you shouldn't have sold houses to people that, they weren't sophisticated. Look, in America, under fair housing laws, somebody's approved to buy a house. You show them a house. You sell them a house. I mean, can you imagine?
And there's a reason, right? We live in a world where you don't want to have all of a sudden like Jim Crow voting rules.
Yes.
You don't want to have education tests to determine whether you're allowed to buy a house.
Right. How many bubbles in a bar of soap? Right.
Yes.
Right. So can you imagine, Jason, if you came in and you were approved, you had a pre-approval from a mortgage company, you said, listen,
and you were like, hey, Jason, I have this bottle of M&Ms. Could you please tell me how many are in it? Right.
Or if I just told you, I think you're an idiot. I'm not going to show you real estate. I mean, it's ridiculous. There's no basis for realtors not to show houses. Now, if you want to blame somebody, blame the government for not regulating any of this nonsense, or blame the lenders that were doing shady things and changing payments. And like you mentioned in your intro, carving up these loans and separating the risk from owning them, from the profit from originating them, and all this craziness that realtors had nothing to do with. So it was just an awful experience for us to be accused of something that was just false, and that people in the industry knew it was nonsense to blame realtors for mortgage nonsense.
So eventually, right, that obviously doesn't work. That piece does not move the ball forward. The prosecution against you begins. One of the things that I find odd and interesting about this prosecution is, having been a reporter who's covered a lot of these things, very often somebody's accused of committing a crime, and let's say it's both a state and a federal crime. And the feds and the state will work together on it. You can see this in the sniper shootings. That's something that I covered. And one sovereign will say, you know what, we're going to charge this person. Other sovereign, meaning the state and the federal government are sovereign, so they could charge, for the same crime and it not be double jeopardy. But the other sovereign will be like, well, that would be a waste of our time and they usually don't charge. So you've got both the state and the federal government working together. I would assume there would be one prosecution, but somehow there are two prosecutions of you, both the state and the federal, on essentially the same charges. So they're coming down on you hard, very obviously, regardless. How does Dawn fit into this? How do you meet Dawn? How does she end up in this story?
Okay, so this is the second life-changing thing. First, there's this raid, and then there's this thing with Dawn. So my colleagues were apoplectic about what was going on. I mean, this was so ridiculous to be accusing realtors of mortgage fraud. Anyway, what happened was my colleagues said, we're going to set up some happy hours. People have questions. Some of the people didn't want to quit or go elsewhere, but they wanted to know what was going on. Some of the customers said, we'll hang in with you. It was very newsworthy. It was in the news a lot. People were curious. So my friend, Brendan Walden, owns a little establishment downtown called AJ Rocco's, and it's near the stadium. We used to go there and grab a
bar
or a snack. Yeah, or it was coffee. It was called the Cleveland Coffee Company in the morning. It was like sort of a Starbucks, better, of course. Anyway, story short is my friend said, hey, look, we're going to start doing some happy hours. Maybe we'll raise a few bucks for legal fees. We'll get witnesses together. We'll just, your lawyer can come, and we're just going to show support. And let's circle the wagons and, get through this. And so I said, okay, that's awesome if you guys want to do that. And they said, look, it'll be fun. We'll have a nice time too. We'll have a slice of pizza, nothing
Give you a
crazy.
chance to kind of like pull away from it a little bit with people who all
Yeah.
kind of understand what's going on.
Yeah. We'll just chat. And yes, exactly. The Yiddish word is nosh. We'll nosh. We'll nibble. We'll talk. We'll even have a cocktail or a coffee, whatever. No big deal. So I said, great. So at one of these early events, Dawn was there talking to one of my friends who came over and said, hey, this lady wants to chat with you. And Dawn said that she was a criminal justice graduate student studying at Cleveland State University here in town, which is downtown Cleveland, by the way, and that she was working with lawyers on similar cases and that she would be very interested in possibly sharing information. These attorneys that she was working with were very skeptical of these cases. The bank's not an innocent victim, she told me, and these cases are all on a faulty premise. And so she basically indicated that she would like to open up a dialogue and share information. And I said, absolutely. So because that was sort of a hectic, well-attended event, we agreed to get together just us after work for a cocktail and a snack. And we became friends. She provided me with some information, not case dismissed, oh my gosh, evidence, but it was helpful. I didn't have any friends, Jason, who knew anything about criminal justice or had been in any type of trouble with the law or anything. I mean, I was a nerd.
So she probably felt like a bit of a godsend in that.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody who's interested in this, who understands the system.
Yeah. So then a couple of weeks later, my attorney called and said, well, I finally have some evidence discs from the prosecutor. Why don't you pick them up and you go through them and I'll go through them. And I picked it up and I had no idea what I was even looking for. So I thought, I wonder if Dawn could help me. So I called her and she did agree to get together with me. So then she's helping me organize evidence. And she says, well, we got to go count by count. I never would have thought of that. I'm like, okay. And then what's your theory of the case? I'm like, what? And then she was telling me, you got to have the theory of the case. So the theory could be that the banks are guilty or that the mortgage guy's guilty, but you're not involved, or, you got to come up with some theory. And then you have to have supporting evidence that you can use in support of that. So that seemed like brilliant advice to me. And so anyway, she's basically pretending to be a paralegal. She met with the lawyer once. We're having meetings. We're talking about, our witnesses. And I go to the first trial and I'm convicted. We were not able to win that case because we didn't.
So at this point, you don't know who Dawn really is by the first case?
Correct. I was not aware.
She did not
come forward until after the first trial, the jury verdict of guilty, but before I was sentenced. Then she came forward to me what was actually going on.
So okay, so you've been convicted at this point. You've had this relationship with Dawn. She's helped your team, helped your understanding of things. She's been like a friend in the middle of a nightmare, right? A new friend. You get convicted, and then you haven't been sentenced yet, but
then she, short version, she calls me up and says, I have to talk to you. And we got together and she was so upset she couldn't even tell me.
Did she? Oh, I was going to say, did she preview for you when she called what she was?
No, she didn't tell me what. She said it was really important and we had to get together. And I said, well, I'm at my, because we moved out of our big fancy office and I was in like a 2-room real estate company with like 3 people left at this point. But I said, well, I'm downtown. I can meet you. And so she was so upset. She actually couldn't even tell me what was on her
on the phone or once.
In person. In person, she couldn't even tell me. Okay. And so then 2 days later, she called me on the phone and she said, don't interrupt me. I wrote out what I have to tell you. And I'm like, please tell me, because I'm completely baffled. And she said that
what were you thinking in between those 2 days? Like, what is going on with Dawn? What are you thinking at that?
I'd been convicted. I was still out on bond. I wasn't particularly patient or in good cheer. So I just didn't know. I was baffled. When I met with her, she didn't tell me, but I asked her, like, what is so upsetting to you, or what do you have to tell me? And she just couldn't spit it out. And I asked her, do you need to borrow money? Are you in some kind of trouble? Are you pregnant? Like, I was just trying to guess, like,
what could it be?
And I told her the saying in our office. The ladies in the office used to say, well, Tony's going to find out at some point. So I might as well just tell him now because he's going to find out anyway, just to get it out of the way. How bad could it be? And she's like, you have no idea. So I didn't know. I was just baffled. I mean, I knew her as a very intelligent, articulate, together young lady. So I didn't think she
So
was.
you hadn't seen anxious or upset or whatever was happening.
No, or some drama queen or anything like. I didn't see like she was some dingling or anything. That the crisis was I spilled wine on my sister's sweater. I mean, like I didn't think it would be anything ridiculous like that. But I really didn't know. But I was just I was concerned because again, she was my friend. And I was just like, what on earth could it be? I had no idea. I was dying to find out, but I had no clue.
Okay. So then the second meeting.
Then she spills the beans. Well, she tells me on the phone, actually. She said, I wrote this out. Don't interrupt me. I actually work for the prosecutor's office. I work for Dawn Pasela and his colleague, Mark Bennett, at this task force. And she tells me that all these conversations we had were recorded so the government could get my trial preparation strategy, which incidentally is illegal. Once you're indicted, you have a right to an attorney. If the government wants to talk to you, they say, come, bring the lawyer and come down to the prosecutor's office and we have a meeting and you could talk.
It's a government agent. A government agent can't replace the cops in terms of talking to you. Somebody being directed by the government. But so she knows it's illegal.
After indictment.
Right.
If it was, I'm sorry.
Yeah, before indictment versus after indictment. But after indictment, they can't do it. You would have to spontaneously, like the jailhouse snitch stories go. But the thing about it that I find so interesting is either at that point, you either have to know that's illegal or she has to know that as soon as you talk to your attorney, you're going to know it's illegal. She knows what she's done, not only at that moment, because I'm thinking of one part of it is like, okay, violated your rights in the sense that she was a government agent interfering with your relationship with your attorney, but also broke federal law because she recorded it.
Correct. I think I would say this to you. Two things. One is I don't think she really wanted to tell me, but I think she thought it was the least worst option. I mean, I don't think this was like a joyful conversation for her.
Right.
I think these folks, I think Dan Caceres and Mark Bennett crushed Dawn's spirit. This was a very idealistic, brilliant young lady who all of my friends thought she had the world by the tail, and she went into criminal justice to do the right thing and help people, and she ended up breaking the law. Now, she was not an undercover operative. Maybe she didn't know it was wrong in the beginning, but I do think she figured it out. So I think this just was just a devastating development in her life. It crushed her spirit that this happened. She was involved with something wrong. And then she also said that there was evidence that I was innocent that was being hidden. So it was a double whammy. It was not just that, and which was proven.
Right.
Exonerated at the second trial. But so she's like, I've got evidence that you have to have because it exonerates you. And there's this wearing the wire to get your trial strategy. She basically says this is absolutely insane. What's going on?
Do you know if like whether it was her parents or a friend or anyone else, like a boyfriend or whatever? I knew she went, did she have anyone she went to for advice before she came to you, or were you with the first person?
She didn't tell me the person's name, but she said that she had a friend inside the prosecutor's office that she would sometimes go out and have drinks with or chat with, and that's who told her, what? You can't do that. And so apparently, this is sort of third hand, so don't quote me on this for sure, but apparently they had asked an undercover officer to do this, and that person said, look, this guy's indicted. I'm not doing it. That's not. So I think they took advantage of Dawn's, she had just started and she had this office manager job.
Her eagerness to please, her eagerness to get involved in the cases.
Ambitious. Yeah. And I think they just took advantage of her kindness. Dawn was a very kind person. She was very empathetic towards others. She always had her antenna up. When we were out, if one of my friends was like by themselves, God forbid, for 30 seconds, she would walk over and pull them into the discussion. Oh, come talk to us over here. She was a very nice person. And I think this really just crushed her spirits. I just think she just never could process, that the idealistic person who studied criminal justice and wants to make a difference and bring the bad guys to justice finds out that this real estate guy really isn't in the mortgage business. There is evidence that should be turned over. I mean, she did tell me once, look, I don't hate the police. I just think court should be fair. She's just like, I just think that if a defendant is entitled to evidence, that should be turned over. And she said these prosecutors were just dirtballs. They were just extremely arrogant. They never would turn over the evidence that they were supposed to turn over. They loved to go on TV, and they just didn't play by the rules.
Just jumping back for a second. How did you feel about Dawn in that moment?
Well, I had a bunch of feelings. First of all, I felt like an idiot because I trusted her, and I should have checked her out or whatever. So I thought, oh boy, am I stupid? Then I was very upset that the prosecutors could do that. I was angry with the prosecutors for doing this to this lady. I said, boy, I had young colleagues in our company. I mean, I treated them like royalty. I love the ladies at our office. Oh, I couldn't believe that they would do this to Dawn. And so I was shocked at this and the stupidity of this. I mean, to have the office manager hanging out with a defendant, to subject your administrative colleague to cross-examination if I found out about it. The other thing, too, is I happen to be a friendly nerd. I mean, women aren't exactly scared of me, but they do.
No, I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying. Like, in the future, all of this makes no sense. But, like, in the moment, like, sitting there in that moment listening to her, what did it feel like then? Like,
it was the second Mack truck on a freeway. I couldn't believe it. I had those thoughts in my head that I just explained. Like, all these thoughts bombarded me, like, more than I could. I was like a computer that just shut down because it was too much. And then the one thing I said to her was, after she's telling me there's all this evidence and they didn't want to give it to you and they destroyed computers in your case, and I put some of it in my purse, some of the documents, and I'm like, what?
So you're getting all of this in that moment.
Yeah. And I said to her, I said, Dawn, she's like, I said, how long has this been going on? For like 2.5 years. And I remember saying, Dawn, you've been dealing with this.
2.5 years?
Yes.
It's 2.5 years.
2.5 years, almost right after the indictment. I think they realized they could lose the case because I wasn't in the mortgage business, that they put her into this stupid thing. And so I think I remember saying, Dawn, you've been dealing with this for 2.5 years. I've been dealing with this for like 2 minutes. I've got to know everything you know. They're going way too fast for me. I've got to sit down with you, and you have to tell me everything you know. And she agreed. She said, no, I understand that. I said, I'm not trying to interrupt you. I'm not trying to short circuit what you're saying. It's important, but I can't believe what I'm hearing. So it was just too much information. I felt like I got run over by a truck.
So you're like, you're knocked out just by the sheer fact that Dawn's not who she really is. And maybe there's some evidence. She's probably, I don't know, it sounds like she was both very upset and anxious, but probably also relieved to be getting out the truth and wanted to get it all out at once.
Yes.
How did it evolve from there? Like, did you guys go to your attorney? Who did you guys go to at that point?
Well, she was very skeptical of attorneys. She said these attorneys are buddies with the prosecutors, and this is not going to work out if you tell your lawyer. And I said, wait a minute. This is crazy. And so we met, and I basically said, look, you have to give me this evidence. You say there's evidence that I'm innocent. Do you think I'm innocent? And she said, oh, I know you're innocent because I know your case better than you. I've been tracking all this evidence. I said, well, how am I innocent? And she said, well, the government says that these lenders didn't allow people to buy houses without a down payment and get cash back, but they actually did have the loan programs. She said that there's documents in your case that they actually signed off on people that had no income to buy houses. Maybe it's stupid, but it's not the realtor's fault, for heaven's sakes. So she basically said, look, your case is a document case. You can't win your case without documents. But I will give you the documents. But she said, the thing is, documents, she was very clear about this. She said, look, documents are contemporaneous. Do you remember what you signed 5 years ago? I mean, these tried for 5 years after people bought properties. She said, the documents are contemporaneous. The prosecutor can't threaten the document's girlfriend. The documents can show, beyond a reasonable doubt that the lender signed off on all these loans, that there was no fraud, that everything was transparently submitted, and the documents would show the lender file contains the true transaction terms. So if you want to buy a house and I say, let's write up the offers, no money down or whatever, if that's submitted to the lender, it's up to them to say yes or no.
Right. But that everybody was on the same page and wasn't hiding anything from anyone.
Right. The idea that it's in their file, but it's my fault that they said yes. I mean, so she basically was like, look, without the documents, you lose because these government witnesses, and one was having an affair with the prosecutor, this lady, Catherine Clover. She's like, they can say whatever they want. And nobody remembers what they signed 5 years ago. When you get a stack of papers at a closing agency, no one remembers. So anyway, the answer is but she was convinced that if I took the documents from her and filed them in court, that she would be indicted for stealing them. Mm-hmm. And the judges would seal the documents and they would never see the light of day. So she was convinced that the only way that these documents should see the light of day was at a second trial, where I could just cross-examine the lenders and cross-examine the witnesses. And then it would be like the old Watergate saying, once the toothpaste is out of the tube, it's hard to get it back in. Once these documents are out in a cross-examination, is this your signature? Yeah. Well, it says you don't have any money. Why am I supposed to go to jail? Or do you say to the lender, is this your program book? Look, on page 86, it says you guys offer this. How am I supposed to go to jail? You guys are offering people to have NINA, no income, no asset loans. Why am I supposed to go to jail?
So how did it get to the point where she was going to be testifying in your case if at first she just wanted to do the documents?
Well, she wanted to do two things at the second trial. She said, you have to prove that you're innocent. I will be your last witness and I will talk about government misconduct. All of these cases are in jeopardy if I come to court because the evidence that exonerates you is not specific to you. It doesn't have Tony on it. It's about whether or not these lenders allowed these loans and whether or not there was any fraud at all. So if the lenders knew about everything, there's no fraud. It defeats any notion of fraud. Maybe it's stupid, but if I decide to loan people money who are walking down the street without signing any documents, I mean, maybe that's dumb, but it's not a crime. So anyway, the answer is she said, look, if you're guilty, nobody cares about misconduct. I mean, it's a brilliant insight for a young lady, right? She said, look, go blow up a nursery school and then argue that the cops screwed up the search warrant. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. You have to show that you're innocent. Then I will come in. And by the way, I have personal knowledge of the misconduct in the prosecutor's office. You don't. You weren't there. I was there. So I actually could testify that the evidence log. Yeah, my name was forged on the evidence log. That Dan Caceres destroyed these computers and moved them and called them some other different case. This lady, Catherine Clover, was having an affair with the prosecutor, was in the office all the time. This is a government witness who's in meeting with other government witnesses inside the prosecutor's office. That's not what they told the jury. They just said, hey, she's just going to come in and testify as a fact witness. I bought houses. But she's actually, they sent her to law school. She's a paralegal inside the prosecutor's office. So anyway, Dawn said that the misconduct, you got to have a Berlin Wall between misconduct and innocence. Tony, if you run around the courtroom and say, oh, the cops are bad, you're going to lose and people will think you're guilty. You have to grind it out the old-fashioned way, count by count. Count one, look at this piece of paper right here. It shows that there's no fraud. Count two, count three. You're going to grind it out count by count and show that you're innocent. And I will be your last witness and I will talk about government misconduct.
Pull it all together.
Pull it all together, and she wanted her life back. She wanted to move forward with her life.
And it's really interesting. She's so smart. She wanted the jury to be able to say, hey, this person is innocent on every count, and these are bad guys, not he's innocent because these are bad guys. Right?
Exactly. That's exactly right. She was absolutely convinced that you've got to show innocence. And then we'll talk about the misconduct. And you cannot mix the two. And she said, you're not really qualified, Tony, because you don't have the personal knowledge. You didn't see Catherine Clover taking documents out of the office in the prosecutor's office, but I saw that stuff.
So how did she go from that anxious, stressed out, can barely tell you to, I'm willing to testify at your trial. Let's do this. Here's the team strategist. How did that transformation happen?
Well, it was over several months, and I think she finally became at ease with, me because I didn't out her. I didn't do anything to hurt her, and I think she thought it was the right thing to do. I also think, the old, I don't know if you ever read the book Six Crises, not to get too political, but in 1962, Richard Nixon wrote a book about, forget the politics, I'm just talking about the book.
Yep.
He wrote a book about how you handle a crisis situation and what you do. And the first thing you have to decide is it worth it to fight or not? Because it's okay to raise the white flag and say, move on. This is not the battle. This is not the hill to die on. So the first question is whether or not we're going to do this. And then if we do go forward, the one thing you can control in an awful situation is your preparation. Okay. And then that gives you an inner confidence. If you really prepare, you really prep, you can create an advantage for yourself over your opponent or over other people. And so I think Dawn knew this case. She was brilliant when it comes to criminal justice. She knew evidence. She understood how to get it introduced in court. And I think that over time, she was very intelligent. I mean, most people would look at these documents and their eyes would glaze over. She actually, she told me one time something. She said, don't tell me what to think. Just give me the facts and I'll decide for myself. Right. So a good journalist feels like, I'm here to give you the facts, not too much analysis, but facts. We'll give you the meat and potatoes, not too much seasoning. So she said, look, that's what I like. And that's what the jury wants. If you stand there and jump up and down and say you're innocent, they're not going to believe that you're innocent. You have to show them with the facts. They'll conclude that themselves. If you say, look, it was in the lender's file or it was submitted this way, or it says they don't have any money, why are we supposed to go to jail? So anyway, that is the style of how we did it. And we did practice. I mean, we did prepare, not just making the exhibits.
So she was actively working with you guys. Was she still working in the prosecutor's office at this time? Or
no,
when she told you she had already left?
She had left and then they wanted her back and she said she couldn't deal with it. So no, she had left.
Why did she leave?
She left in May of 11. She died in April of 12. My second trial started in February of 12 and ended in April of 12.
Okay.
So she's the last witness. I mean, she's supposed to come to court and she's on my witness list. And what the government did in lieu of filing a motion to quash the subpoena and saying, hey, we don't want our office lady to testify. If there was a hearing on the motion to quash the subpoena or an argument, well, why should she testify or why shouldn't she? Dan Caceres and Mark Bennett, the prosecutors, would have had to disclose that she was wearing a wire, that she was recording my trial preparation, that they were listening to these tapes. I mean, it would have been a disaster.
They would have had to explain to the judge what was going on, why they thought she shouldn't be a witness. So they were afraid of that part.
They were afraid of that. It would have been hard. I mean, standing there, it's like, admitting that, you committed a crime. So they didn't want to do that. So then they did what we do here in Cleveland and Cuyahoga County. We start threatening and intimidating and scaring people. So they went to Dawn's parents' house. They went to her place. They had basically her apartment staked out. They told her that if I have it in writing, if you come to court, you will be indicted. You can't talk to Tony Viola. You have a confidentiality agreement with us. And so they said she wasn't allowed to discuss the case.
Did you and Dawn know all these things in real time? Like it being staked out? Was she telling you what was going on?
I only was able to talk to her once during the trial. She did call the court, and I only talked once. She told me, do not call me from jail. Do not write me letters from jail. They will see the letters. They will listen to the calls. Do not do it. The element of surprise is the best with these guys. But I mean, they knew that she was helping me. Well, they knew definitively when she was on my witness list. Right. But I think they knew during the trial because I kept having, for instance, they said there's no FBI interview with this lender. He said they allow these loans, or their employees were allowed to sign off on all these loans. There is no fraud. Okay. And they lied. See, the thing is, Dawn was brilliant. She told me this. She said, look, ask for the FBI 302 interview summary with this guy, Newcomb, who's going to testify on behalf of the lender. And I said, Dawn, why would I ask for it? You just gave it to me. And she said, Tony, are you an idiot? And I said, yes, but I still want to know why I should ask for
that. If you ask for it, it sends the message.
Well, they don't have it because they didn't give it before. So they're going to say, no, we don't have this. So she said, you want to establish a Brady violation by asking. And so I just said, Your Honor, this is ridiculous. The bank, I supposedly stole $46 million in the nation's largest mortgage fraud case. You mean nobody in the government's ever picked up the phone and called this company? They're just going to fly in and extemporaneously just testify off the cuff? I mean, this is ridiculous. There must be an interview with the bank. No, there's no interview with the bank.
She probably would have made a great lawyer.
Who? Dawn? Oh, yeah. No, she was great. Because she challenged everything. I mean, she challenged everything. I mean, when she was a kid, her mom's, it's time you go to bed at 8:00. Why? Is there a law? Why do I have to go to bed at 8:00? No, she was great. And the other thing is she knew she had a good sense of like what would connect with people, like that theory of Don't tell me what to think. Don't give me the conclusion. Just give me the facts. I'll get there. Just give me the facts. So she was brilliant.
So you guys could talk before your sentencing. You go up to jail. Your team is obviously working with her. You guys have a strategy, but you can't really talk all that much during that time period. There's that one call. How do you find out she's died?
Well, when she didn't show up, because when I talked to her before, she said that she was being threatened. And I said, well, Dawn, I'll take you off the witness list. I said, if something bad happens to you, I won't be able to deal with it. I said, I know I won this trial. And she's like, no, you don't understand. They already know that I gave you those documents. I have to come in. I'll be a whistleblower. I want to get over this part of my life. I have to come in. And there's other people that are wrongfully imprisoned or wrongfully prosecuted. So I said, okay. So I expected her to come in, and she had given me the questions to ask her. And she said she was bringing documents, by the way, to substantiate some of this misconduct. Anyway, she didn't come in. And the Judge Daniel Gall, by this point, this trial had gone on for close to 2 months. And he said, look, you guys, this case is ending. If this witness doesn't show up, it was an afternoon. He said, next morning, if she's here at 9 o'clock, she can go on. Otherwise, we're doing closing statements. This party's over. I got all kinds of cases. And you guys with this mortgage nonsense clogging up the courtroom, it's enough. So this case is ending tomorrow. And we all said, yes, Your Honor. Well, she didn't show up again. And then we went to closing statements. So I didn't know. I didn't hear from her. I didn't know. I thought maybe she changed her mind or something. But anyway, when she didn't show up, we went to closing arguments, and then the jury got the case. Then I asked the judge, do you want to sit in the bullpen, which is a jail cell outside the courtroom, during jury deliberations in case they have a question? And I said, yes, Your Honor, please. And he said, okay, fine. You might sit there all day for nothing. And I said, I don't care. And then I was sitting in a jail cell, and I could hear the keys jingle of the sheriff's deputy. And there was a row of cells, so I didn't know what cell they were coming to. And then when I saw the keyhole turn, I got up and I put my hands out because you have to get cuffed to go into court. And he said, F the cuffs. And I said, what? Did I win? And he said, don't ask any questions. And they hauled me into court, and the judge was white as a ghost. The court reporter was actually in tears. There was no jury. So I thought, well, it can't be a decision, and it can't be a jury question. So what the heck's going on here? And then Judge Gall puts on the record that Dawn was found dead in her apartment, and that he felt that it had to go on the court record because she was a witness in the case. I was in an absolute state of shock. I could not believe it. I mean, again, I guess another time hit by a truck. I mean, I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
And there's a transcript of me screaming, oh my God, no. Oh my God, no. Incidentally, the prosecutor's reaction was very suspicious. Dan Caceres. First of all, how does he know so quickly that this lady's found deceased?
Wait, you were saying there is a transcript of you saying, oh my God, no.
Yes, there is a transcript of me screaming, and the prosecutor doesn't seem particularly upset about this. And he said that she died of an alcohol overdose. How do you know? There was no toxicology report yet. So the whole thing was just very suspicious from the start. But I was in such a state of shock and so devastated that I couldn't even see straight. They actually, the sheriff guy I was wearing a suit and tie for court, and he took my tie and my belt. He said, you look, you're going to hang.
He was that concerned.
And then they put me back in the cell, and they kept opening the door to say, are you okay? Are you okay? And I said, can you guys please leave me alone? One guy came in and said, I knew Dawn. One of the deputies said she was such a nice lady. Whenever I couldn't, if I had a prisoner or I was in court, she would grab me a cup of coffee or bring me a sandwich. She was such a nice lady. And he was in tears. And then I said, can you guys please just leave me alone? And they opened the door again. And they said, you have to come back out to court. And I said, why? And they said, it's the verdict. And I was not guilty on all counts, but I didn't even care. And I remember, what do you mean? So they said, how do you, count one, not guilty, count two, not guilty, count. I didn't even know what I was listening to. I was like, I was in such a state of shock that Dawn died. And then next thing you know, they're going through all this not guilty, not guilty. And I remember at 35 or 36, because they went count by count. I remember thinking, my God, I've been all not guilty. Then I remember thinking, these jurors must think I'm insane because I'm in tears. I'm beside myself and I should be happy. And then after 58 or whatever it was, 59 of these not guilty, I was just, I just, it
You
was
were in
so
shock.
real.
You were in
I
shock.
was, I mean, I could only have so much going on in my head, and I just, it
Yeah,
was too.
that's shock.
I wouldn't wish this. I wouldn't wish this on anybody. I mean, nobody deserves this. I mean, the government is unbelievable to treat people in our own country like this. I'm talking about Dawn particularly. I mean, but just this is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. We're a bunch of realtors. We didn't think we were doing anything wrong, and to have all these trials and all this government brutality. I mean, it's unreal. It's unreal, and it's just so hard to process or think about. But when
What do
I
you
just
what do you think Dawn would be doing right now if she hadn't got involved in the case?
Well, the sky was the limit for that lady. I mean, my friends all, when we met her, we thought she had the world by the tail. We thought, my gosh, this lady is brilliant. She was absolutely gorgeous. She was incredibly articulate. She had such insightful comments. She was just a fun person to chat with. The people just wanted to know, oh, gee, I wonder what Dawn would say, or I wonder what Dawn thinks about this. I promised her, I said, look, if I win my case and get out of jail, we'll set up a little office somewhere. We'll get a coffee pot and a whiteboard and a couple of tables and chairs, and we'll help anyone, because she wanted to help other people. I mean, the one way to honor her memory is have these other cases reviewed, particularly where this Clover lady was testifying in all these other criminal matters as well. Anyway, I think she would have needed some time to heal and move forward with her life. And, you know, I think her law enforcement career was over at this point, but I think she would have gone on.
This was a live discussion on Patreon with our listeners. If you'd like to join us for more discussions with us and other listeners, we can be found on most social media platforms, including a listener-run Facebook group called the Silver Linings Fireside Chat. For deeper conversations with our guests and other live conversations with listeners, you can also join us on our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Silver Linings Handbook. This is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. I'm Jason Blair. We'll see you all again next week.